The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Catherine, the Princess of Wales, sat at her mahogany desk reviewing the day's schedule. Her personal assistant had just delivered a stack of invitations and correspondence that required her attention. Among them was an elegant cream-colored envelope bearing the seal of one of Britain's most prestigious charitable organizations. Catherine had been looking forward to this particular event for months. The annual gala for the Children's Medical Research Foundation was something she had supported personally for years, even before her marriage to Prince William. The cause was deeply meaningful to her, having witnessed firsthand the struggles of families dealing with childhood illnesses during her numerous hospital visits and charity work. She opened the invitation with anticipation, expecting to see the usual formal request for her patronage and attendance. Instead, her eyes widened as she read the contents. The letter was polite but firm in its message that due to unforeseen circumstances and scheduling conflicts, they would need to respectfully withdraw their invitation for her to serve as the evening's guest of honor. Catherine read the letter 3 times, trying to understand what could have possibly changed. Just 2 weeks earlier, she had been in detailed discussions with the Foundation's board about her speech topics and the specific children and families she would meet during the event. The planning had been meticulous, with her team coordinating closely with the organizers to ensure every detail was perfect. The confusion quickly turned to concern as Catherine realized this wasn't simply a scheduling mix-up. The formal language of the letter suggested something more serious had occurred behind the scenes. She immediately reached for her phone to call her private secretary, hoping to get some clarification about what might have prompted this sudden change. Before she could dial, William walked into the study, still in his morning workout clothes. He noticed the troubled expression on his wife's face immediately. After 12 years of marriage, he had learned to read her moods with remarkable accuracy. The slight furrow in her brow and the way she held the letter told him something significant had happened. "What's wrong?" he asked, crossing the room to stand beside her chair. Catherine handed him the letter without saying a word, watching as his expression changed from casual concern to genuine bewilderment as he read the contents. William had been equally supportive of Catherine's involvement with the Children's Medical Research Foundation. He had attended several of their events alongside her and had witnessed the genuine impact their work had on families across the United Kingdom. The Foundation's decision seemed completely out of character for an organization that had always been grateful for royal patronage. "This doesn't make any sense," William said, setting the letter down on the desk. "You've been working with them for years. The board members have always been nothing but appreciative of your support." Catherine nodded, feeling a mix of disappointment and confusion. "I keep thinking there must be some mistake. Perhaps they meant to send this to someone else, or maybe there's been a miscommunication somewhere in their organization." However, deep down, both Catherine and William suspected this wasn't a simple administrative error. The timing seemed particularly suspicious, coming just weeks after a series of challenging situations that had put additional pressure on the royal family's public image. Recent months had brought unexpected scrutiny to several members of the royal family, with media outlets and social commentators questioning various aspects of their public duties and charitable work. While Catherine had largely remained above the fray, maintaining her reputation as one of the most respected members of the royal family, the current climate had made everyone more cautious about their public associations. William suggested they contact Catherine's private secretary immediately to begin investigating what might have prompted this unexpected development. He knew his wife well enough to understand that she wouldn't simply accept this rejection without trying to understand the reasoning behind it. As Catherine made the phone call, William found himself feeling increasingly protective of his wife. He had watched her dedicate countless hours to charitable work, often going above and beyond what was required of her royal duties. The idea that someone would question her commitment or suitability for such work was both puzzling and concerning to him. The private secretary, Margaret Thornton, had been working with the royal family for over 15 years and had developed a reputation for her diplomatic skills and thorough research abilities. When Catherine explained the situation, Margaret immediately assured her that she would begin making discreet inquiries to determine what had prompted the Foundation's decision. "Your Royal Highness," Margaret said in her calm, professional tone, "I'll reach out to my contacts within the charitable sector to see if there have been any recent developments or concerns that might explain this situation. It's certainly unusual for an organization to withdraw an invitation so close to an event, especially without providing a clear explanation." Catherine appreciated Margaret's measured approach to the situation. Years of experience had taught her that jumping to conclusions or reacting emotionally to unexpected developments rarely led to positive outcomes. However, she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was happening behind the scenes. After ending the call, Catherine and William spent the morning discussing possible explanations for the Foundation's decision. They considered everything from internal politics within the organization to potential media pressures that might have influenced the board's thinking. William expressed his frustration with what he saw as an unfair situation. "You've been nothing but dedicated to their cause," he said, pacing around the study. "If there's some concern or issue, they should have had the courtesy to discuss it with you directly rather than simply withdrawing the invitation." Catherine agreed, but reminded him that they needed to remain calm and professional in their response, regardless of how personally disappointed they felt. Years of royal training had taught her the importance of maintaining dignity even in difficult circumstances. As the day progressed, Margaret began making her discreet inquiries within London's charitable community. Her initial conversations revealed that several organizations had been receiving pressure from various sources to reconsider their associations with certain public figures, though the specific nature of these pressures remained unclear. The situation was clearly more complex than a simple scheduling conflict or internal organizational issue. Someone or some group was actively working to influence the Foundation's decision-making process, though their motivations and methods remained mysterious. By evening, Catherine found herself feeling not just disappointed but genuinely concerned about the broader implications of what was happening. If this Foundation had been pressured to withdraw their invitation, it was possible that other organizations might face similar pressures in the future. William could see the worry in his wife's eyes as they prepared for dinner. He knew that Catherine's charitable work was one of the most fulfilling aspects of her royal duties, and the thought that someone might be trying to undermine her efforts was deeply troubling to both of them. As they sat down to dinner that evening, both Catherine and William realized they were facing a challenge that went far beyond a simple invitation withdrawal. Something was happening that could potentially impact not just this single event, but Catherine's entire approach to her charitable work and public duties. The Foundation's letter had opened a door to questions and concerns that neither of them had anticipated, setting in motion a series of events that would test their resolve and challenge their understanding of the complex world in which they operated as senior members of the royal family. The next morning brought little relief from the uncertainty that had settled over Kensington Palace like a heavy fog. Catherine woke early, her mind immediately returning to the previous day's unexpected development. She had spent a restless night wondering about the implications of the Foundation's decision and what it might mean for her future charitable endeavors. Margaret Thornton arrived at the palace before 9 o'clock, carrying a leather folder filled with the results of her preliminary investigations. Her expression was serious, but controlled as she was shown into the private sitting room where Catherine and William were waiting for her report. "Your Royal Highnesses," Margaret began, settling into the chair across from them. "I'm afraid the situation is more complicated than we initially thought. My contacts within the charitable sector have confirmed that the Children's Medical Research Foundation received what can only be described as coordinated pressure from multiple sources." Catherine felt her stomach tighten as Margaret continued her explanation. The private secretary had discovered that over the past 2 weeks, the Foundation had received numerous phone calls and emails questioning the wisdom of maintaining their association with Catherine. While the specific content of these communications varied, they all seemed to center around concerns about potential controversy that might overshadow the Foundation's important work. "What kind of concerns?" William asked, his voice carefully controlled despite the anger that was clearly building beneath the surface. Margaret consulted her notes before responding. The messages appear to focus on recent media speculation about various aspects of royal duties and public spending. While none of the concerns mentioned seemed to have any basis in fact, the volume and coordinated nature of the campaign appears to have rattled the Foundation's board of directors. Catherine listened to this explanation with a growing sense of disbelief. She had always conducted herself with the highest standards of professionalism and dedication in her charitable work. The idea that someone would orchestrate a campaign to damage her reputation seemed almost surreal. "Do we know who is behind this campaign?" Catherine asked, though she suspected the answer would not be straightforward. Margaret shook her head slowly. "That's where things become particularly concerning. The communications came from various sources, but they appeared to be coordinated. Some came from what appeared to be concerned citizens, others from organizations claiming to represent various interest groups. However, when my contacts attempted to verify these sources, Many proved to be either non-existent or unwilling to provide any substantial information about their concerns. The implications of this revelation were deeply troubling to both Catherine and William. Someone had clearly invested considerable time and effort into creating a campaign specifically designed to damage Catherine's charitable work. The sophistication and coordination of the effort suggested this wasn't the work of a few disgruntled individuals, but rather a more organized attempt to undermine her public role. William stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the palace gardens while processing this information. He had always known that their positions as senior royals would attract both support and criticism, but this seemed to represent something far more deliberate and potentially harmful than the usual media scrutiny they had learned to manage. What was the Foundation's specific reasoning for withdrawing the invitation? Catherine asked, wanting to understand exactly how the board had been influenced by this campaign. Margaret referred to her notes again. According to my source within the organization, the board held an emergency meeting 3 days ago. While they acknowledged that none of the concerns raised had any factual basis, they felt that the potential for controversy might overshadow the important message they were trying to convey at the gala. Catherine found this explanation particularly frustrating. The Foundation's work focused on improving medical care for seriously ill children, a cause that should have been above any kind of political or personal controversy. The idea that her presence might somehow detract from such important work seemed both unfair and short-sighted. They were essentially intimidated into making this decision, Williams said, turning back from the window. His voice carried a tone of controlled anger that Catherine recognized from their private conversations about other challenging situations they had faced. Margaret nodded in agreement. That appears to be an accurate assessment of the situation. The board members I spoke with expressed regret about their decision, but felt they had no choice given the pressure they were receiving. As the morning progressed, Catherine found herself grappling with a range of emotions. Disappointment was certainly prominent, but it was increasingly accompanied by a sense of determination to understand who was behind this campaign and why they had chosen to target her charitable work specifically. Williams suggested that they needed to consider the broader implications of this situation. If one foundation could be pressured into withdrawing their invitation, it was possible that other organizations might face similar campaigns in the future. This could potentially impact not just Catherine's work, but the charitable sector's willingness to maintain relationships with any members of the royal family. We need to think strategically about how to respond, Williams said, settling back into his chair. If we simply accept this situation without any response, it might encourage whoever is behind this to continue or even escalate their efforts. Catherine agreed with her husband's assessment, but she also recognized the delicate nature of their position. Any response they made would need to be carefully considered to avoid inadvertently making the situation worse or drawing additional unwanted attention to the controversy. Margaret suggested that they consider reaching out to other charitable organizations with whom Catherine had established relationships to gauge whether they had received similar pressures. This information would help them understand whether this was an isolated incident or part of a broader campaign. Over the next few hours, Catherine's team began making discreet inquiries with several other foundations and charitable organizations. The responses they received painted a troubling picture of coordinated pressure being applied across multiple organizations. The British Heart Foundation reported receiving similar communications questioning Catherine's suitability as a patron. The National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children had also been contacted by individuals expressing concerns about potential controversy. While none of these organizations had taken any action based on these communications, the pattern was clearly established. This is clearly not a random or isolated incident, Catherine observed as they reviewed the information gathered throughout the day. Someone has invested considerable effort into trying to undermine my charitable work specifically. William felt a growing sense of protectiveness toward his wife as the scope of the campaign became clear. He had watched Catherine dedicate herself wholeheartedly to her charitable work, often spending long hours visiting hospitals, meeting with families, and working to raise awareness for important causes. The idea that someone would try to damage this work seemed both cruel and pointless. As evening approached, Catherine and William found themselves facing a decision about how to respond to this coordinated campaign. They could choose to remain silent and hope the situation would resolve itself naturally, or they could take a more active approach to defending Catherine's reputation and charitable work. The stakes involved in this decision were significant. A passive response might be interpreted as acceptance of the criticisms being leveled against Catherine, potentially encouraging further attacks. However, a more aggressive response carried the risk of drawing additional media attention to the situation and potentially making the controversy larger than it needed to be. Margaret advised them to consider consulting with the palace's communications team to develop a strategy that would address the situation while maintaining the dignity and professionalism that was expected of senior royals. She emphasized the importance of responding in a way that would not only defend Catherine's reputation, but also protect the charitable organizations that had been caught up in this campaign. As they prepared for dinner that evening, both Catherine and William realized they were facing one of the more challenging situations of their married life. The attack on Catherine's charitable work felt deeply personal, striking at something that brought her genuine fulfillment and allowed her to make a meaningful contribution to society. The day had revealed the existence of a deliberate campaign designed to damage Catherine's public role, but it had also demonstrated their need to respond thoughtfully and strategically. The next steps they took would be crucial in determining not only how this immediate crisis would be resolved, but also how similar challenges might be handled in the future. The third day of the crisis brought new developments that would fundamentally change Catherine and William's understanding of what they were facing. Margaret Thornton arrived at Kensington Palace shortly after breakfast, accompanied by James Richardson, the palace's head of communications, and Detective Inspector Sarah Collins from the Metropolitan Police's Protection Command. The presence of a police officer immediately signaled that the situation had escalated beyond what anyone had initially imagined. Catherine felt a chill of apprehension as the three advisors settled into the private conference room, their serious expressions indicating that they had uncovered something significant during their investigations. "Your Royal Highnesses," Detective Inspector Collins began, "our investigation into the coordinated campaign against the Princess of Wales has revealed some concerning information that we believe you need to be aware of immediately." William instinctively moved closer to Catherine as the police officer opened her briefcase and removed several documents. Years of security briefings had taught him to recognize when a situation had moved beyond simple media management into territory that might involve genuine threats to their safety or well-being. "We've traced the origin of the campaign against Her Royal Highness to a sophisticated operation that appears to be funded and coordinated by individuals with specific political motivations," Detective Inspector Collins continued. "This goes far beyond random criticism or even organized opposition to the monarchy in general." The revelation hit Catherine like a physical blow. She had spent days trying to understand how her charitable work could possibly have generated such opposition, never imagining that the attacks might be motivated by broader political objectives rather than anything she had actually done or failed to do. Margaret Thornton consulted her notes before adding additional context to the police officer's briefing. "Our investigation has identified at least 12 different organizations and online platforms that received coordinated messaging designed to create the appearance of widespread concern about the Princess of Wales's charitable activities." James Richardson, who had remained silent until this point, leaned forward to address the couple directly. "What makes this particularly sophisticated is that the campaign was designed to appear grassroots and spontaneous, when in fact it was carefully orchestrated to achieve maximum impact with minimal exposure of the people actually behind it." Catherine found herself struggling to process the implications of what she was hearing. The idea that someone had invested substantial resources and planning into an effort specifically designed to damage her reputation seemed almost incomprehensible. She had always tried to conduct herself with integrity and focus her public work on causes that would benefit society. "Do we know why I was specifically targeted?" Catherine asked, though she wasn't sure she really wanted to hear the answer. Detective Inspector Collins exchanged glances with Margaret and James before responding. "Based on our analysis, it appears that the Princess of Wales was chosen precisely because of her positive public image and the respect she commands both within the royal family and among the general public. The people behind this campaign seem to believe that damaging her reputation would have broader implications for public support of the monarchy." William felt a surge of anger at this explanation. The idea that someone would target his wife not because of anything she had done wrong, but specifically because of her success and positive contributions to society, seemed particularly cruel and calculating. "What kind of resources are we talking about here?" William asked, trying to understand the scope of what they were dealing with. James Richardson consulted his own notes before responding. "Our preliminary analysis suggests that this campaign required significant financial investment, sophisticated coordination across multiple platforms and organizations, and detailed knowledge of how charitable organizations make decisions about their public associations. The sophistication of the operation was becoming increasingly clear as the briefing continued. This wasn't simply a matter of a few disgruntled individuals expressing criticism, but rather a well-funded and carefully planned effort to undermine Catherine's public role through indirect pressure on the organizations she worked with. Detective Inspector Collins explained that the investigation had revealed communications between various individuals involved in the campaign that suggested this was just the beginning of a longer-term effort to damage the royal family's reputation and public support. Catherine represented an initial target because of her visibility and the respect she had earned through her charitable work. The strategy appears to be based on the theory that if they can successfully damage the reputation of the most respected members of the royal family, it will create broader questions about the institution's relevance and value to society, the police officer explained. Catherine felt a deep sense of sadness as she listened to this explanation. She had always approached her royal duties with a genuine desire to make positive contributions to society, focusing particularly on issues related to children's welfare, mental health, and family support. The idea that this work was being deliberately undermined for political purposes was deeply disheartening. Margaret Thornton provided additional details about how the campaign had been implemented. The organizers had carefully researched the board members and decision-making processes of various charitable organizations, then crafted messages specifically designed to create concern among these individuals about potential controversy or negative publicity. They understood that charitable organizations are often particularly sensitive to anything that might overshadow their core mission or create distractions from their fundraising efforts, Margaret explained. The messages were crafted to exploit these concerns while avoiding any specific factual claims that could be easily disproven. The psychological sophistication of the campaign was perhaps its most disturbing aspect. Rather than making direct attacks that could be easily refuted, the organizers had created an atmosphere of vague concern and uncertainty that was much more difficult for Catherine or her representatives to address directly. William asked about the legal implications of what had been discovered. Detective Inspector Collins explained that while the campaign appeared to involve some potentially illegal activities, including identity fraud and harassment, building a prosecutable case would be challenging given the sophisticated methods used to hide the true identity of the organizers. We're continuing our investigation and working with various agencies to identify the individuals responsible, she said. However, I want to be clear that this type of operation is designed specifically to be difficult to trace and prosecute. As the briefing continued, Catherine found herself thinking about the broader implications for her charitable work. Even if the immediate crisis could be resolved, the knowledge that such sophisticated campaigns could be launched against any member of the royal family created new challenges for their public roles. James Richardson addressed this concern directly. We need to develop both short-term strategies for responding to this specific situation and longer-term approaches for protecting against similar campaigns in the future, he said. This is clearly not going to be an isolated incident. The meeting concluded with the establishment of a coordinated response plan involving enhanced security measures, improved communication with charitable organizations, and a comprehensive media strategy designed to protect Catherine's reputation while exposing the artificial nature of the campaign against her. As their advisors prepared to leave, Catherine and William were left to process the disturbing revelations they had just received. The attack on Catherine's charitable work had revealed itself to be part of something much larger and more concerning than they had initially imagined. The knowledge that sophisticated political operatives were actively working to undermine the monarchy through attacks on individual family members created new anxieties about their public roles and the safety of their family. What had started as confusion about a withdrawn invitation had evolved into a comprehensive threat that would require ongoing vigilance and strategic response. That evening, as Catherine and William discussed the day's revelations, both of them realized that their lives and public roles had been fundamentally changed by what they had learned. The innocence and straightforward nature of their charitable work had been compromised by the knowledge that such activities could be weaponized against them by individuals with broader political objectives. The fourth day marked a turning point in how Catherine and William approached the crisis that had engulfed their lives. Armed with a clearer understanding of what they were facing, they made the decision to take a more proactive stance rather than simply responding to attacks as they emerged. William had spent much of the previous evening on secure phone calls with senior palace officials, members of parliament, and security experts, working to build a comprehensive understanding of the threat they were dealing with. His military training and experience had taught him the importance of gathering intelligence and developing strategic responses to complex challenges. The morning brought a new development that would prove crucial to their evolving strategy. Lady Patricia Weatherby, the chair of the Children's Medical Research Foundation, called Catherine directly to request a private meeting. Her tone was apologetic but urgent, suggesting that she had information that might help explain the Foundation's controversial decision. Catherine agreed to meet with Lady Patricia at Kensington Palace, recognizing that direct communication with the Foundation's leadership might provide insights that could be valuable in addressing the broader campaign against her charitable work. Lady Patricia arrived at the palace shortly before noon, visibly uncomfortable but determined to share what she had learned since the Foundation's board meeting 3 days earlier. She was an elderly woman who had dedicated much of her life to charitable work, and her distress about the current situation was evident from the moment she entered Catherine's private sitting room. "Your Royal Highness," Lady Patricia began, accepting the offered seat across from Catherine, "I must begin by expressing my personal regret about the board's decision. I voted against withdrawing the invitation, but I was outnumbered by colleagues who felt we had no choice given the pressure we were receiving." Catherine appreciated the woman's honesty and encouraged her to share whatever information had prompted her to request this meeting. Lady Patricia explained that since the board meeting, she had conducted her own investigation into the sources of the pressure they had received. What she discovered had alarmed her enough to risk potential criticism from her fellow board members by coming to Catherine directly. "The communications we received were far more sophisticated than I initially realized," Lady Patricia continued. "When I began investigating the individuals and organizations that had contacted us, I discovered that many of them appeared to be connected in ways that suggested coordination." Catherine listened intently as Lady Patricia described finding links between various supposedly independent groups that had expressed concerns about the Foundation's association with the royal family. Phone numbers led back to the same offices, email addresses were registered to overlapping organizations, and several of the most vocal critics appeared to be using false identities. "I began to suspect that we had been manipulated," Lady Patricia admitted. "The board members who voted to withdraw the invitation did so based on what we thought was genuine grassroots concern about potential controversy. Now I believe we were deliberately misled about the nature and source of this opposition." This confirmation of what Detective Inspector Collins had discovered provided Catherine with additional ammunition for addressing the broader campaign against her. More importantly, it suggested that at least some of the organizations that had been pressured might be willing to reconsider their positions once they understood the artificial nature of the criticism. Lady Patricia went further, offering to work with Catherine's team to expose the manipulative tactics that had been used against the Foundation. She had documented her findings and was prepared to present them to her fellow board members, potentially reversing their decision to withdraw Catherine's invitation. "I've spent 40 years in charitable work," Lady Patricia said with evident determination. "I will not allow my organization to be used as a tool by people with hidden political agendas, especially when it means abandoning someone who has given so much to causes that matter." Catherine found herself moved by the older woman's courage and integrity. The decision to come forward despite potential criticism from her colleagues demonstrated the kind of moral leadership that Catherine had always admired in the charitable sector. After Lady Patricia left, Catherine immediately called William to share this positive development. They both recognized that having an ally within the organization that had been targeted could be crucial for their broader strategy of exposing and countering the campaign against Catherine's charitable work. William had his own encouraging news to share. His conversations with senior government officials had revealed that Catherine's situation was not unique, and that several other high-profile public figures had been targeted by similar sophisticated campaigns in recent months. This pattern had attracted the attention of various agencies responsible for protecting democratic institutions from foreign and domestic interference. "The Prime Minister's office has assured me that this situation is being taken seriously at the highest levels of government," William told Catherine. They recognize that attacks on respected public figures can undermine public confidence in institutions more broadly. James Richardson joined them for lunch to discuss the communication strategy they would implement based on these new developments. The plan he outlined was more aggressive than anything they had previously considered, but the sophisticated nature of the threat seemed to require a correspondingly sophisticated response. "We're going to move beyond simply defending against attacks," James explained. Our strategy will focus on exposing the artificial nature of the campaign against the Princess of Wales while reinforcing the genuine support she enjoys from the charitable sector and the general public. The first element of this strategy involved working with Lady Patricia and other allies to document and publicize the manipulative tactics that had been used against various charitable organizations. By demonstrating the coordinated nature of the campaign, they hoped to inoculate other organizations against similar pressure. The second component involved proactively reaching out to Catherine's supporters within the charitable sector to organize a coordinated response that would demonstrate the genuine respect and appreciation she enjoyed among organizations focused on children's welfare, mental health, and family support. Catherine felt energized by this more proactive approach. Rather than simply waiting to respond to attacks, they would be taking control of the narrative and working to protect not just her own reputation, but also the integrity of the charitable sector that had been manipulated by political operatives. William suggested adding a third element to their strategy, working with law enforcement and security agencies to ensure that the investigation into the campaign against Catherine would be thorough and comprehensive. While prosecution might prove difficult, public exposure of the tactics being used could serve as a deterrent to future operations. As the afternoon progressed, Catherine's team began implementing various aspects of their new strategy. Margaret Thornton reached out to other charitable organizations to share information about the campaign tactics and offer support for any similar pressures they might have received. James Richardson began developing communications materials that would expose the artificial nature of the campaign while reinforcing Catherine's legitimate credentials and achievements in the charitable sector. The goal was to provide journalists and other public commentators with accurate information that would help them understand what had really happened. Detective Inspector Collins worked with Catherine's team to ensure that their response strategy would not interfere with the ongoing criminal investigation. She also provided guidance on security measures that might be necessary given the sophisticated nature of the threat they were facing. By evening, Catherine and William felt more optimistic about their situation than they had since the crisis began. The combination of Lady Patricia's courage, government support, and their own proactive strategy created a sense that they were finally taking control of a situation that had initially seemed overwhelming and incomprehensible. However, both of them recognized that the broader implications of what they had discovered would continue to affect their public roles for years to come. The knowledge that sophisticated political operatives were willing to target respected public figures and charitable organizations created new challenges that would require ongoing vigilance and adaptation. The campaign against Catherine had revealed vulnerabilities in the systems that supported charitable work and public service more generally. Addressing these vulnerabilities would require not just resolving the immediate crisis, but also working to strengthen the resilience of democratic institutions against similar attacks in the future. The fifth and final phase of this extraordinary crisis began with a series of developments that would ultimately vindicate Catherine's reputation while exposing the full scope of the campaign that had been orchestrated against her. The proactive strategy that she and William had developed was about to bear fruit in ways that exceeded their most optimistic expectations. Lady Patricia Weatherby had worked throughout the weekend to prepare a comprehensive presentation for an emergency meeting of the Children's Medical Research Foundation's Board of Directors. Her documentation of the manipulative tactics used against the organization was thorough and compelling, providing clear evidence that the board's original decision had been based on deliberately misleading information. The Monday morning board meeting lasted nearly 3 hours as Lady Patricia methodically presented her findings. She had traced phone calls back to organizations that didn't exist, identified email addresses that were registered to the same individuals using different names, and documented the coordinated timing of various communications that had initially appeared to be independent expressions of concern. By the end of the meeting, the board voted unanimously to reinstate Catherine's invitation to serve as guest of honor at their annual gala. More significantly, they also voted to issue a public statement explaining how their organization had been targeted by what they now recognized as a sophisticated disinformation campaign. When Margaret Thornton called Catherine with this news, both she and William felt a tremendous sense of relief and validation. The Foundation's public statement would serve as powerful evidence of the artificial nature of the campaign against Catherine, potentially encouraging other organizations to reconsider any decisions they might have made based on similar pressure. James Richardson had been working with journalists from several reputable news organizations to investigate the broader campaign against Catherine. His strategy of providing them with documented evidence of the manipulative tactics being used had begun to generate serious media interest in exposing the story behind the story. The Times of London published the first major investigation into what they termed a sophisticated campaign of manipulation targeting charitable organizations and their relationships with members of the royal family. The article provided detailed documentation of the tactics used against the Children's Medical Research Foundation and several other organizations, drawing connections between various supposedly independent sources of criticism. The Guardian followed with their own investigation focusing on the broader implications of such campaigns for democratic institutions and civil society organizations. Their reporting identified patterns of similar operations targeting other high-profile public figures, suggesting that Catherine's experience was part of a much larger phenomenon. These media investigations began to generate significant public attention and discussion about the vulnerability of charitable organizations to manipulation by political operatives with hidden agendas. Editorial writers and commentators expressed outrage at the idea that important charitable work could be disrupted by artificial campaigns designed to serve narrow political interests. William felt particular satisfaction at the public reaction to these revelations. The British public's response demonstrated their appreciation for Catherine's genuine contributions to charitable work and their rejection of attempts to manipulate their opinions through deceptive tactics. Detective Inspector Collins provided Catherine and William with an update on the criminal investigation that reflected the progress being made in identifying the individuals responsible for the campaign. While she couldn't share specific details about ongoing investigative activities, she indicated that several arrests were likely in the coming weeks. What you experienced was part of a much larger operation, Detective Inspector Collins explained during their meeting. The investigation has revealed connections to other campaigns targeting various public figures and institutions. Your decision to respond proactively has provided crucial evidence that will help us address this threat more comprehensively. The international implications of the case were also becoming apparent as law enforcement agencies in several countries began coordinating their investigations into similar operations. The sophisticated nature of the campaign against Catherine had apparently attracted attention from intelligence services concerned about threats to democratic institutions more broadly. Catherine found herself reflecting on how the experience had changed her understanding of the complex environment in which senior royals operated. The naive assumption that charitable work would be above political controversy had been permanently shattered, replaced by a more realistic appreciation of the need for constant vigilance against sophisticated threats. However, the resolution of the immediate crisis had also strengthened her commitment to continuing her charitable work with even greater determination. The support she had received from organizations like the Children's Medical Research Foundation demonstrated that the vast majority of people involved in charitable work shared her genuine commitment to making positive contributions to society. William had been particularly impressed by the courage shown by individuals like Lady Patricia Weatherby, who had risked criticism and controversy to expose the truth about what had happened to their organization. These examples of moral leadership provided hope that democratic institutions and civil society organizations could develop resilience against similar threats in the future. The Children's Medical Research Foundation's annual gala took place 3 weeks later, with Catherine serving as guest of honor exactly as originally planned. The event drew unprecedented media attention, partly because of the controversy that had surrounded it, but primarily because of the powerful message it sent about the importance of protecting charitable work from political manipulation. Catherine's speech that evening focused on the crucial importance of maintaining the independence and integrity of charitable organizations. She spoke eloquently about the need to protect the space for genuine civic engagement and charitable work from those who would exploit it for narrow political purposes. The work we do together to support children and families facing medical challenges is too important to be compromised by those who would use our compassion and dedication as tools for their own agendas, Catherine said to the assembled guests. We must remain vigilant against attempts to manipulate our good intentions while never allowing such threats to diminish our commitment to the causes we serve. The audience's response to Catherine's speech was overwhelmingly positive, with many guests expressing their appreciation for her willingness to address the controversy directly while maintaining focus on the Foundation's important mission. In the weeks that followed, several other charitable organizations that had been targeted by similar campaigns reached out to Catherine's team for guidance on how to identify and respond to manipulative tactics. Margaret Thornton worked with these organizations to develop protocols for verifying the legitimacy of concerns raised about their public associations. James Richardson collaborated with communications professionals from various charitable organizations to create educational materials that would help board members and staff recognize the warning signs of coordinated manipulation campaigns. These resources were shared widely throughout the sector, strengthening its overall resilience against similar attacks. The criminal investigation continued to develop, with several individuals eventually being charged with various offenses related to identity fraud, harassment, and conspiracy. While the full extent of the operation took months to unravel, the prosecution sent a clear message about the serious consequences of using deceptive tactics to manipulate charitable organizations and democratic institutions. Catherine and William's marriage had been strengthened by their experience of working together to address this complex challenge. William's protective instincts and strategic thinking had complemented Catherine's determination to maintain her charitable work while defending the integrity of the sector more broadly. Looking back on the crisis 6 months later, Catherine recognized that it had ultimately made her more effective in her royal duties. The experience had taught her valuable lessons about the importance of building strong relationships with allies, responding proactively to threats, and maintaining focus on core values even when facing sophisticated opposition. The campaign against Catherine had failed not just because it was based on deceptive tactics, but because it had underestimated the strength of the genuine relationships she had built through years of dedicated charitable work. The support she received from organizations and individuals throughout the crisis demonstrated that authentic commitment to worthy causes creates resilience that cannot be easily undermined by artificial manipulation. William often reflected on how the crisis had revealed both the vulnerabilities and the strengths of the institutions they served. While sophisticated political operatives could temporarily disrupt charitable work through deceptive campaigns, the ultimate failure of such efforts demonstrated the enduring power of genuine dedication to public service and social good. The resolution of Catherine's situation had broader implications for protecting democratic institutions and civil society organizations against similar threats. The lessons learned from their experience were shared with other public figures and organizations, contributing to a more comprehensive understanding of how to maintain resilience against sophisticated manipulation campaigns. Years later, Catherine would look back on this period as a crucial turning point in her development as a senior royal and public figure. The crisis had tested her resolve and forced her to develop new skills and strategies, but it had ultimately strengthened her commitment to using her position to make positive contributions to society while protecting the integrity of the institutions that made such work possible.